may have him down, but he predicts a victory and says he's exactly where he wants to be. Our fourth story tonight, John McCain's claim that he will win the presidency next Tuesday despite polls to the contrary. It's today's story, yes, but it also happened on February 19th, 2000. On voting day in the South Carolina primary of that year, the McCain camp dismissed polls that had him down and predicted victory. McCain having said he, quote, couldn't be happier with where we are. He lost 53-42. Which brings us to today. In a widely discussed memo from last night, McCain's top pollster, Bill McInturff, claimed that McCain is now, quote, functionally tied and, quote, essentially tied with Barack Obama, claiming that the race has tightened in the last few weeks, that the difference is now within the margins of error, that those margins will be erased when still undecided voters make up their minds, and because they mostly voted for Bush in 2004, they will now break overwhelmingly for McCain. Record high black and first-time voter turnout erased, McInturff says, by equally historic turnout among, well, everybody else. Never mind that polls weighted to account for heavy turnout favor Obama even more. And what do the national polls say? Hotline puts Obama at 49, McCain at 42, margin of error 3.3%. Gallup closer to McInturff's thinking, Obama 49, McCain 46. Margin of error, 3%. This one based on the premise of traditional turnout, which, as we said, McInturff of the McCain campaign says will not happen. And polling in individual states gives McCain an even steeper hill to climb. The most stunning finding has Obama closing the gap with McCain, as we mentioned, in McCain's home state of Arizona. McCain at 46, Obama at 44. The 2-point gap is now within the 3% margin of error. Oh, and Politico.com reports this comment, which McInturff included in a private email about his memo, quote, please pray for another night of tracking like the one I had last night. That's pollster speak for you. Let's bring in polling uber guru Nate Silver, the creator of 538.com. Good evening, Nate.
Hi, Keith, and congratulations to the Phillies.
Yeah, sorry, we can get that sports news in here, too. 4-3, right? 4-3. Under what conditions are Obama and McCain, as McInturff says, functionally tied? And have you heard the term functionally tied before in polling?
Well, I mean, functionally you have to win 270 electoral votes to win the Electoral College, and right now McCain is not close enough in enough states. I would look at these three, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Virginia. If you start to see McCain poll within the margin of error there, I'm not saying he has to be ahead, within the margin of error, then he might have an argument. But right now he's down by about 6 or 7 in Colorado, by 8 or 9 in Virginia, and by double digits in most polling in Pennsylvania. Those states haven't tightened at all. Maybe he's picking up votes in Idaho and places like that, but that won't help him to 270.
Right, as E.J. Dion just said, picking up margin in places he was already going to win or can't win. There's a vast difference between somebody supporting a candidate, obviously, and actually turning out to vote and vote for that candidate. Can there be enough of a gap between those two things to make room for the McInturff scenario of a McCain victory based on overwhelming traditional voting turnout?
Well, I mean, this is the problem. Do we have a 2004 kind of electorate or a 2008 electorate, maybe more like the one we had in the primaries, especially early on in Iowa and New Hampshire? People do lie to pollsters about whether they're going to vote or not. People might intend to vote, then election day gets around, they have to pick up their kids, they're hungover, I don't know what, they don't vote. So, you know, different pollsters have different methodologies. Gallup has 2 different methodologies they employ at the same time. One has Obama up 7, that's kind of the 2008 model, I'd call it. One has him up 3, that's based on 2004 turnout. You know, in some ways I think the polls might end up really high or really low, maybe, you know, a 2-point margin or 10 or 11. There is a big range here, but even at the lower end of that range, McCain may not be quite close enough, especially in the states that he needs to win.
Do we have measures, good, useful measures yet about enthusiasm and turnout, or are we still just guessing?
Well, you know, we have the one hard piece of evidence, which is the early voting totals in 12 or 15 states that have begun to vote already. And in some of those states, like North Carolina, Nevada, Democrats are outpacing Republicans 2-1 to the polls. And this used to be a Republican strength, where about 60-40 was the early vote for George Bush in 2004. It's clear you have a lot of African-American support. Obama's going to get a lot of support. I think they may even overperform whites with their turnout rate. You know, maybe young voters haven't turned out as much, although they usually don't vote early. People, you know, of my generation tend to procrastinate most often. But for the most part, when you see, you know, 2-1 Democratic turnout so far in Nevada and North Carolina, states that were purple or red really last time around. That's got to be a red flag, I think, for McCain.
And lastly, the observation about McCain on February 19th of 2000 saying we're just where we wanted to be, and now saying the same thing and getting clobbered in 2000. Is that just what politicians have to say when they're so consistently behind, or is polling that unscientific at this point?
Well, I mean, polling isn't terrifically accurate. It hasn't had a very good cycle so far. But, you know, what their internals actually show and what they put in a memo don't really relate to one another. They might have internals that are tightening, but even if they weren't, if their internals have them 12 points behind in Pennsylvania and, you know, 8 points behind nationally, they're not going to say that. They have to make sure that turnout isn't depressed. One scenario they have to be worried about is the Republican base just not turning out.
And the Phillies over the Rays, as much as we congratulate the Phillies, Tampa Bay, after 10 last-place finishes in a World Series and competitive throughout, they deserve several tips of the hat, I think.
Yeah, I hope you didn't have that game on TiVo, but congratulations, Philadelphia.
Nate Silver of 538.com also has some sort of baseball interest. I'm not exactly sure what that is. Great thanks as always, Nate. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you, Keith.